why I got in that was the Human Rights Ordinance here in Jacksonville is what made me get in that race. In other words, it was a very long shot race for me, but we knew that we needed candidates to get a bill. It sounds crazy. To get a bill passed in our city council, we had to put pressure during the election season to the other candidates on this issue. And how you did that is have a candidate in the race that makes sure that that issue is brought up at every forum that we do, every event, and you're in rooms with other candidates across the county. So it kept the issue from, okay, so how you get in this position is by joining the party. And joining the party is not just like a club. It is elected position. If you're not elected through the proper procedure, then you're actually can be appointed through the party, but you have to go through a process to make that happen. But to become a chair of a district is, most people don't realize that we have 14 districts, city councilmen and women in the city, but at different areas of our community. And that's how we divide our party currently, is by those districts. And the chair of that district is responsible to help correlate our precinct people in that district to help us get turnout and activate, either by, canvassing, phone banking, just basic outreach. We did a forum just recently at the Brandon Brooks Library, and we put all that together and invited the candidates to come and speak in front of the community. So does it have much authority? No, not really. Does it have an impact? Yes, it does, because it's our responsibility to remind voters that it's election season. Even though they're getting mailers in their mailbox, or maybe get a text message, it's our way to wake up our neighbors. In other words, I'm over District 1007. It's my responsibility as the precinct person, not the chair, as the precinct person of that, is to try to get out and engage with as many of those Democrats to tell them, hey, it's election season. I need you to go out and vote. Who you vote for on that when it comes to the thing, especially during primary, we don't try to interject as much as party officials. I would kind of say it's none of that. I say why we have so much empathy is people have lives. In other words, they, some of us, like myself, is very involved in politics, but like, I'll use my parents, for example. I got them voting while I was in college, right after college, but they've not voted in years. And one reason, they're like, life catches up to you. We don't have time to, invest in this, if it's not something of interest to them, even though it's very important. Because a lot of people say, how politics doesn't involve me. I'm like, yes, it does. Do you walk on a sidewalk? Do you drive on a road? Do you go to a public library?
Sure.
Do you pay taxes? So government affects you every day, but most normal people do not realize why it's important to know who my city council person is, who our state senator is, who our U.S. senator is, or your congressperson. It's because they're the ones that, you may not feel it right away, but city government, you feel right away who the mayor is and who your city council person is, because that affects you very fast. In other words, if someone says, why isn't my street cleaned up and there's rubber tires and stuff in my yard? How I tell them is, it's government, but you also got to, in a city as large as Jacksonville, I keep on bringing how large we are, if the government may not even know that tire is sitting there, so there's ways to reach out in that government process. But if something's bigger and you're not getting response, that's why it's important to know who your council person is, or the at-large, because we have 4 of them.
Sure.
To get a hold of them to fix a basic problem for you. Their assistant, and it's usually not the council person, it's their assistants, because the assistants that help your city council man or woman are the rock stars down at City Hall. That's who the rock stars are, because they're the ones that's going to get you the most action.
Sure.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. Because you got to realize, us that are in the party, we're all volunteers. In other words, like I said, we ran for a position or we've been appointed, but we're all volunteers. So to get even a handful of those Democrats in a room to help decide how we're going to spread that message and try to raise the money, because it takes money to spread messages, no matter if we're at the local, the state, or the national level. no matter if it's Democrat or Republican, you've got to have the money to spread that message. If it's either, especially if it's like TV ads or digital ads, it takes a lot of money to get behind that. So if you don't have the people stepping up that's not in the party directly, that's not helping us making those phone calls or canvassing or whatever to get that word out. And social media, truthfully, and things like this podcast have made it, I have felt like it should make it easier, but I don't know if it has. In other words, a lot of people that just engage in a lot of these things, but you're not a complete political one, so that kind of helps. So the person that normally listens to you is not just listening about politics. So that's great that they're getting the message, but a lot of it goes into, when you have these YouTubers or podcasters that do politics, unless you're interested in politics, you're not going to listen to them. So it's hard to get it out. A good example that I thought was kind of interesting is the candidate that I'm helping, Angie Nixon, is running for the U.S. Senate. One of her, we just got an endorsement from, now I can't remember her name, it just went out of my brain. It's the one lady that's involved with kids that's real big, that's like blown up, that has millions and millions of followers, that does a kids program on YouTube. And so that's a little bit outside the realm of what would be. In other words, she's not going to promote politics on her actual YouTube, but for her to give the nod and actually endorse a candidate like that is big, because she's got not just 1 million, of my knowledge, she's up in like 20 or 30, 40 million people, on it. So, that influence of what you guys do as podcasters and YouTubers and all this kind of stuff is making an impact, but sometimes we're talking to ourselves inside the silo on a lot of them also. So in other words, the like I said, the regular person that's working 9 to 5 that's not paying attention may not hear what the conversation is. And I can't say it's a shame. It's just, it wears you down, especially what's happened in our nation with, especially our political scene right now with Trump and everything. It's worn people down to the point, and I'm not saying it's different completely in politics, because things, when the Vietnam War was going on and all that kind of stuff, it and the civil rights movement, it just builds on top of you as a person that's just trying to go out here and work a job, pay your bills, feed your family, have, occasionally maybe go on vacation. So to go, now you got to pay attention to this ballot and figure out who you should hire, because that's what it is. It is a job interview for these candidates. And people, I wish, would take it a little bit more seriously to find out what's going on in the realm of it, because they do shape your life. Now, with Angie, she's, if she gets to go to the U.S. Senate, there's 100 senators. So will she make that big an impact personally? Yeah, she's our voice, would be our voice in the U.S. Senate, or, if Alex Benjamin wins, whichever one. But she's still there, or he's still there for you to have a voice. And it's when those people, after they're elected, if they're not listening to us, and that's happening a lot. That's why a lot of these people that are in office are not doing town halls and stuff. They refuse to listen. And this is why we're getting so frustrated. It's one thing to be able to call them or email them, but the fact that they represent us, and even on their breaks, they never even come and talk to the people. The only time they ever talk to them is to get their vote. That's what's made a lot of people frustrated.
Now, what is the first thing you tell someone who says, I'm thinking of running for office?
Oh, that one's easy. First, have you thought about getting education? In other words, because there's programs, all of different groups do them all across the state. In other words, I can tell you as a consultant all you different things, but does not mean I'm telling you the truth. Okay, so a consultant can blow smoke up any politician's butt and tell them, give them all numbers and all this kind of stuff. But as a candidate, you should be educated yourself. Two, that's very important. How big is your Rolodex, even though we don't hardly use that word anymore? And three, how much money do you think you can raise yourself? In other words, of that Rolodex, how much is your friends, family, colleagues willing to invest in you just to get the ball rolling in a race? People think they can do a little bit of money. Unless you can raise I'm just using a city council race, for example. Just the bare minimum is at least $10,000. Okay. And that just really doesn't let you do much. but at least it scrapes the surface. Most candidates now for city council in Jacksonville, I'm just using it since I'm here, is $100,000 or more. Okay, a mayor's race is $1 million to $2 million. Okay, Congress, same way, if 100,000 to 300,000 at least, easily. If you're in multiple counties, like the Congressional District 4 race, that's in 3 counties separated. So you got Duval, Nassau, and Clay. So you're going to need at least 100,000 in each county to properly do it and spread the word to those counties. Between the amount of constituents that you need, literature, if you're going to do, because at that point you almost need to make sure you get either some kind of TV or radio influence, even with digital. I think the hardest truth is if they do not use their power of the vote, they could lose their power to vote. That is the whole objective with everything from redistricting to not passing the Voter Right Act to anything that they can to bring us backwards, where it's already hard enough to get someone to go vote. And then you put blockade after blockade in front of them. Is they do that is because you got to realize in the United States is democratic. Okay. The only reason, like with the presidential election, is the fact that we use the electoral college. So we've got to fight. And what I mean by fight is using every resource we can to encourage everybody to dominate and get out to vote for Democratic candidates so we can get our lives back. And that's because what has happened with the Republican Party, it is no longer the Republican Party.